Large-scale Russian drone and missile attacks on Kyiv and elsewhere in Ukraine have killed at least 3 people and wounded dozens more.
At exactly 6 hours, the Black Sea appeared deceptively calm. The surface of the water reflected the pale light of early morning. The wind was steady, unremarkable. Nothing moved fast enough to draw attention. At Sevastopol's naval pier, a Russian BK-16 fast assault boat rested quietly at its moorings. The engines were silent. The deck crew moved without urgency. To anyone watching, it was just another ordinary morning inside one of the most heavily defended regions on Earth. But beyond the horizon, 6 Ukrainian Beaver strike drones were already airborne, skimming just meters above the water, flying so low their shadows blended into the waves. In 15 minutes, that calm would be shattered, and what began as another drone raid would evolve into a precise, humiliating dismantling of Russia's Black Sea defensive shield. By the 3rd year of full-scale war, combat between Ukraine and Russia had transformed into something far more complex than tanks and artillery. This was no longer a contest of raw strength. It was a war of systems, sensors against stealth, signals against noise, automation against human intuition. Crimea stood at the center of that contest. Russia had spent years turning the peninsula into a fortress. Early warning radars scanned hundreds of kilometers. Surface-to-air missile systems layered engagement zones. Electronic warfare vehicles waited to smother enemy communications. Naval patrol craft stood ready to intercept threats before they reached shore. On paper, it was airtight. But war is never fought on paper, and every system, no matter how advanced, is bound by the unchanging laws of physics. Ukraine had learned how to exploit those laws. 8 miles inland, a Russian Krasuka-4 electronic warfare vehicle came fully online. Its antennas rotated slowly, methodically, as raw power flooded into the system. Within seconds, the surrounding electromagnetic spectrum was saturated with interference, a deliberate storm of noise designed to smother anything transmitting nearby. The objective was brutally simple: overwhelm enemy signals until they drowned in static. Inside a Ukrainian control station, the effect was instant and unmistakable. Signal strength collapsed. The lead operator pushed his control stick to the left. Nothing happened. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3. Only then did the drone finally respond, banking hard, so sharply that it nearly clipped its wingman flying beside it. At 95 kilometers per hour, those 3 seconds translated into 80 meters of uncontrolled flight, 80 meters of flying blind, just meters above a hostile coastline, where cliffs rose suddenly from the sea and left no room for recovery. Altitude began to fall: 190 meters, 180, 175. At 150 meters, the cliffs ahead would turn the drone into shattered composite and salt spray. The Krasuka had crushed the signal from a stable 70 dBm, full bars of control, to 110. A single flickering trace of connection remained. At 120, the link would sever completely, transforming the drone into an unguided projectile. But Ukraine had faced this before. The drone switched instantly to aggressive frequency hopping, jumping between 40 channels every second, following a pattern known only to its operators. Russian electronic warfare systems detected the shifts, tried to analyze them, and attempted to redirect jamming power. But that process took time, too much time. By the moment the interference arrived, the signal was already gone, leaving Russian operators fighting echoes of a target that no longer existed. They were always jamming where the drones had been, not where they were now. The lead operator initiated a burn-through maneuver, dumping all available transmission power into a single frequency. The video feed snapped back, unstable and grainy, like an old broadcast fighting interference. The coastline emerged, so did the radar complex. But then, movement. A rotating antenna cut through the static. A Tor M2 air defense system had gone active. The Tor operator had been waiting all morning. His system was designed to hunt drones at medium altitude, targets moving predictably between 80 and 120 kilometers per hour. But Ukrainian drones flew below 30 meters, where radar physics begins to fail. At that height, radar pulses slam into the ground and bounce back with overwhelming intensity, flooding the receiver. To the Tor system, a drone looked no different than a vehicle on a coastal road. When the operator switched to motion filtering mode, ignoring anything moving slower than 40 kilometers per hour, the Ukrainian formation slowed to 35. They vanished. Then terrain forced a decision. Power lines stretched across the valley at 25 meters. Fly under them and crash. Fly over them and be detected. The lead drone climbed to 60 meters for exactly 3 seconds. The Tor's screen erupted with contacts. Missile away. The interceptor launched at Mach 2.5, accelerating faster than human reaction time, but the drone was already diving. Below 20 meters, the missile's proximity proximity fuse never armed. It screamed overhead and self-destructed. This was not chance. 2 Tor batteries had been positioned 3 kilometers apart. On paper, their engagement zones overlapped perfectly, but physics created a flaw. Each missile needed 1.5 kilometers to arm. Any closer, and it was useless. Ukraine had discovered the corridor, a narrow path, 1.4 kilometers from each launcher, where neither Tor could engage. 10 seconds of perfectly straight flight, no evasive maneuvers, no mistakes. Like walking between 2 guard dogs on short chains, they passed through just as another missile launched, streaking harmlessly behind them, but worse awaited. Ahead sat a Pantsir S-1, radar locked and tracking all 6 drones. The operator launched paired missiles, forcing targets into predictable, evasive paths. Mach 3, 1 kilometer per second, but these missiles were designed to hunt jet. Engines burning hundreds of degrees hotter than their surroundings. Ukrainian drones were electric, barely warmer than the morning air. Infrared seekers searched desperately for heat that barely existed. One missile passed within 8 meters, no detonation. The second exploded near another drone, shredding its fuselage. The video feed spun wildly before cutting to static. 2 drones gone. The Pantsir switched to guns. Twin 30mm cannons filled the air with steel, calculating perfect firing solutions, assuming predictable flight paths. The drones refused to comply. Every second and a half, random inputs: dive, roll, bank. The targeting computer was always solving the wrong equation. At 500 meters, the surviving drones dropped to 10 meters altitude. The guns physically could not depress low enough without striking their own vehicle. Geometry ended the engagement. Small arms teams tried next. Shoulder-fired missiles hunted for heat signatures that vanished against land and sea. Missiles chased phantom thermal pockets and splashed harmlessly into the water. At 6:15, the first drone struck the P-18 early warning radar, its shaped charge collapsing into a hypersonic jet of molten copper. Seconds later, another destroyed the Nebo-U surveillance radar, blinding Crimea's skies. A third, damaged but airborne, slammed into the S-400 engagement radar, triggering cascading electrical failures across the system. And finally, the last drone banked toward the pier, the BK-16 patrol boat. Despite incoming fire, the drone struck just below the waterline. Explosion. Flooding, silence. In just 15 minutes, Ukraine dismantled a defensive network that had taken years to build, not through overwhelming firepower, not through sheer numbers, but through patience, preparation, and a precise understanding of how the battlefield truly works. Radars were blinded, not by bombs, but by altitude and timing. Missiles were wasted, not because they failed, but because they were forced to obey the limits of their own design. And a warship, built to hunt, to intercept, to project power, was crippled without ever leaving port. This was not chaos. This was calculation. Every maneuver exploited a gap. Every gap was created by physics, and every defense, no matter how advanced, was ultimately bound by the same unbreakable rules. This was not just an attack on equipment or infrastructure, it was a demonstration of how modern warfare has changed. Today, victory no longer belongs to the side with the loudest engines, the thickest armor, or the biggest explosions. It belongs to those who understand signals instead of noise, geometry instead of bravado, timing instead of brute force. On that quiet Crimean morning, there were no heroic charges or dramatic last stands, only systems failing, one by one, exactly as planned. And when the smoke cleared, one truth remained undeniable. Physics had made its choice, and it chose Ukraine.